Good evening. I'm Albert Carnesdale, the Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and it's my privilege to welcome you to tonight's forum. This event this evening is sponsored by the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy at the school, by the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics, and by a host of student organizations, which, if I mentioned them all, would take the rest of the evening, but I do want to thank them all. I'd like also to acknowledge Luann Nyberg, who was instrumental in arranging our event this evening. She's a mid-career student here at the school and director of the Children's Defense Fund of Minnesota. So thank you. Now, tonight's speaker, Marian Wright Edelman, is no stranger to Harvard. She's addressed our audiences many times, holds an honorary degree from this institution, serves as a member of the Weiner Center's Advisory Committee and of the school's Visiting Committee. She graduated from Spelman College and, yes, from Yale Law School. Went from there to direct the Jackson, Mississippi Office of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. She was the first black woman to be admitted to the Mississippi Bar, and she was instrumental in getting Head Start off the ground in Mississippi. In 1968, she founded the Washington Research Project, which was a public interest research and advocacy organization, which was the predecessor to the Children's Defense Fund. From 1971 to 73, she was here at Harvard, directing the Center for Law and Education, while simultaneously still overseeing the Washington Research Project. When she left Harvard in 1973, the Children's Defense Fund was spun off as an independent entity with her as founder and president. The purpose of the Children's Defense Fund, or CDF as it's sometimes called, is, quote, to provide a strong and effective voice for all the children of America who cannot vote, lobby, or speak for themselves, paying particular attention to the needs of poor, minority, and disabled children, close quote. Under her leadership, CDF has grown to a staff of more than 100 and a budget of over $10 million a year. At a recent celebration in November of CDF's 20th anniversary, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton said that, quote, the Children's Defense Fund is our constant conscience. Let's make sure that we not only hear it, but that we act on it, close quote. Mrs. Edelman is the author of Families in Peril, An Agenda for Social Change, and the 1992 bestseller, The Measure of Our Success, A Letter to My Children and Yours. She's won a MacArthur Foundation, as it's sometimes called, Genius Prize. She's been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. She's received many honorary degrees. But these tributes cannot adequately express the debt that our nation owes her. Of all the accolades that Mrs. Edelman has received, perhaps none mean as much as those expressed by her 3 sons. And for an example, I'll go on a little longer than I normally would with a quote, but I think this conveys a great deal of meaning about this person and what she stands for. In her book, The Measure of Our Success, her middle son, Jonah Edelman, wrote, and here's the quote, my mother's book is a written testament to her beliefs, from which everyone, including myself, can benefit. Many of her lessons for life strike a chord in me, but 3 in particular represent what I have come to see as the legacy of my ancestors. 1, don't feel entitled to anything you don't sweat and struggle for. 2, never give up. You can make it no matter what comes. Nothing worth having is ever achieved without a struggle. And 3, always remember that you are never alone. You are loved unconditionally. There is nothing you can ever say or do that can take away my or God's love. And then Jonah goes on to say, when I'm feeling paralyzed by a task that seems too difficult, I remember that the love that lies at the core of my family and their legacy to me. The love gives me strength, and I can move again. Close quote. Now, it's said that it takes a village to raise a child. Tonight's speaker has done as much as anyone else to create, to nurture, and to protect that village here and around the globe. Please join me in welcoming the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, Marian Wright Edelman.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody who quotes my children is a friend. Thank you. On April 5th, 1968, in Cleveland, Ohio, following Dr. King's assassination, Robert Kennedy spoke about the mindless menace of violence in America, which again stains our land and every one of our lives. It is not, he said, the concern of any one race. The victims of violence are black and white, rich and poor, young and old, famous and unknown. They are most important of all human beings, who other human beings loved and needed. No one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain who will suffer from some senseless action of bloodshed. And yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours. Since Robert Kennedy spoke these words, he and 800,000 American men, women, and children have been killed by guns. Another 520,000 Americans have died violent deaths by other means in America's undeclared 20th century civil war. Between 1979 and 1991, almost 50,000 American children were killed by guns. More American children died from firearms on the killing fields of America than American soldiers died on the killing fields of Vietnam. From 1968 through 1991, while more than 1.3 million Americans died violently at home, 31,000 American soldiers died in military conflicts in other countries. Americans were 42 times more likely to kill each other than to be killed by any external enemy. This quarter-century death toll from the relentless carnage of American against American and of Americans who, unable to face life or find love, hope, purpose, or safe haven in their family, community, faith, or democratic civic life, took their own lives, is almost 3 times the number of reported American battle deaths in all the wars in the 20th century. This plague of violence, as Robert Kennedy said in '68, transcends racial boundaries and is far more likely to strike at home than on the streets, despite what our headlines about crime tell us. In 1968 through 1991, approximately half of the gun homicide victims were white and half were black. Of the gun suicide victims, which is the largest number of gun deaths, 93% were white and 6% were black. And where the race of the murderers were known, 83% of the murderers of whites were white and about 94% of the murderers of blacks were blacks. I want to repeat, most murders are committed not by strangers, but by family members, neighbors, or acquaintances. The ugly, malignant tumor of violence that has devoured America's communities has spread to younger and younger children. And so I think the murder of babies and young children has become accepted, even routine, not only in Bosnia, but in Boston and in Baltimore. 25 American children, the equivalent of a classroom full, are killed by guns every 2 days in our spiritually sick nation. Twice as many American children under 10 were killed by firearms in 1991 as American soldiers were killed in the Persian Gulf and Somalia combined. One of our children is 15 times as likely to be killed by gunfire as a child growing up in Northern Ireland. In 1990, American 10 to 14-year-old children, more of them, twice as many of them, died from guns than the total number of handgun handgun deaths of citizens of all ages in all of Sweden, Switzerland, Japan, Canada, Great Britain, and Australia combined. An American child dies from gunshot wounds every 2 hours. A police officer is killed by a gun every 5 days and 9 hours. Homicide is now the third leading cause of death among children 5 to 14, elementary and middle school children. And it is the leading cause of death among black teen males. More young black males die from guns each year than from all the lynchings throughout American history. But where is our movement to stop the current lynching? Escalating violence against and by children and youth is no coincidence. It is a cumulative, convergent, and heightened manifestation of a range of serious and too long neglected problems. Epidemic child and family poverty, increasing economic inequality, racial intolerance and hate crimes, pervasive drug and alcohol abuse and violence in our homes and popular culture, growing numbers of out-of-wedlock births and divorces have all contributed to the disintegration of the family, community, and spiritual values and supports that all children need. Add to these crises easy access to deadlier and deadlier firearms, hordes of lonely and neglected children and youths left to fend for themselves by absentee parents in all race and income groups, gangs of inner city and minority youths relegated to the cellar of American life without education, jobs, or hope, and political leadership over the 80s had paid more attention to foreign than domestic enemies and to the rich than the poor. And you face the social and spiritual disintegration of American society that I believe confronts us today. Where are the family values in the richest nation on earth that lets 1 in 5 or 14.6 million of its children live in poverty in 1992, 5 million more than in 73? How much concern do we have for the future when young families with children of all races saw their median income plunged nearly a third between 1973 and 1990? What does national security mean when an estimated 3 million children witness parental violence every year and a child is reported abused or neglected every 13 seconds? How can we expect the 100,000 children who are homeless every night and have no place to call their own to respect the homes and property of others? I wonder how many of the 17-year-old murderers today are children who were born without adequate prenatal care and nutrition, or who were unable to get the quality early childhood experience because our nation said we could not afford to give them a healthy start or a head start. How many of the 16-year-old teen mothers having babies today in at school with an undetected hearing problem that made them fall further and further behind in school because they lacked health care? How many of the 18-year-old murderers witnessed and suffered abuse and neglect at home from parents who themselves never were nurtured, taught to parent, or unable to work? How many of the 19-year-old youths abusing and pushing drugs today are children who saw the adults in their lives abusing or pushing drugs and who lacked positive community alternatives to dysfunctional families and dangerous streets after school, on weekends, and during idle summer months? Plain fact is, we have not valued millions of our children's lives, and so they do not value ours in a society in which they have no social or economic stake. Countless youths are imprisoned by lack of skills in our inner city neighborhoods where the future means surviving the day and living to 18 is a triumph. Their neglect, abuse, and marginalization by parents, schools, communities, and our nation turn them first to and again against each other in gangs, and then against a society that would rather imprison than educate them. Our market culture tells them they must have designer sneakers, gold chains, and fancy cars to be somebody, while denying them the jobs to buy them legally. So they are easy marks for drug dealers and profit-driven gun manufacturers and sellers in pursuit of new markets for their lethal products. I don't know how many of you have been seeing the ads from gun manufacturers. They have tapped out the white male market, and now they are marketing to women and to children. Now, I believe there is no excuse for youth or adult crime, and perpetrators must be swiftly and fairly and effectively punished. But there's also no excuse for the unbridled trafficking in non-sporting firearms and ammunition that are often intended to do nothing except kill other human beings. A gun is produced in America every 10 seconds and is available to almost anybody who wants to own or rent one, including children. One ad encouraging parents to buy guns for children asks, and I quote, "How old is old enough?" and concludes, "Age is not the major yardstick. Some youngsters are ready to start at 10, others at 14. The only real measures are those of maturity and individual responsibility. Does your youngster follow directions well? Is he conscientious and reliable? Would you leave him alone in the house for 2 or 3 hours? Would you send him to the grocery store with a list and a $20 bill? If the answer to these questions or similar ones are yes, then the answer can also be yes when your child asks for his first gun. More than 200 million Americans' guns are in the hands of Americans. There are more gun dealers than gas station owners in our country. You often can get a license to sell guns with less hassle than it takes to get a driver's license, and can buy a gun as readily as a toaster across the counters of some of our largest chain stores. In fact, less readily can you buy a toaster, because they are regulated as a consumer product that we need to at least have regulated. Although our nation regulates the safety of countless products, including children's teddy bears, blankets, toys, and pajamas, it does not regulate the safety of a product that kills and injures tens of thousands of children and other citizens each year. And so violence runs amok in child lives. It romps through our children's playgrounds, frolics down the streets they walk to and from school, dances through their school buses, waits at the stoplight and bus stops, runs them down on the corner, shoots through their bedroom windows, attacks their front porches, abuses them or a parent at home, and tantalizes them across the television screen every 6 minutes. It snatches away their parents at work and steals their aunts and uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters and friends. It saps their energy and will to learn and makes them forget about tomorrow. Violence nags and picks at their minds and spirits day in and day out, snuffing out the promise and joy of childhood. Innocent children as young as 10, psychiatrists and social workers report in some places, think about death all the time, plan their own funerals, what they will wear, the floral arrangements, the music they want to hear. Some young black and brown men speak longingly of hoping to reach the ripe old age of 18 in their bullet-ravaged, job-destitute neighborhoods. Others speak wistfully of prison with 3 hots and a cot as a safer haven than their dead-end streets and empty, jobless futures in a society that has decreed them expendable. My heart broke recently when I went into a downtown Connecticut Avenue in Washington law firm and met a handsome, well-mannered black high school graduate working as a security guard. He'd done everything we asked him to do, but his life goal was to make it to 20 when I asked him what he wanted to do, and he proudly announced he thought he was going to make it to 20 in the capital of the free world. How have we failed so deeply as parents, as religious, community, and political leaders when our children's youthful dreams turn to dust so early? For every child that dies from guns, at least 30 other children are injured every day, adding billions to our out-of-control public health cost. And then we leave them often with the consequences of their violence. Dr. Gabarino, president of the Erickson Institute, says that inner-city children are exposed to such heavy doses of extreme violence that they exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, like children in war-torn countries such as Mozambique, Cambodia, and Palestine. Not only do we send many of our children out to war without helmets or combat training or adult protection, we leave them to wrestle with their grief and fears and psychic monsters alone, without adequate counseling or mental health treatment to relieve their chronic endangerment. How many schools and neighborhoods in America have developed and implemented carefully conceived, thoughtful safety plans in response to the emergency conditions in which so many children live? How many religious congregations are working to provide safe corridors and havens for children after school and on weekends and in the summer? How many neighborhood groups are watching out for children who desperately need a friendly face and a word and glimmer of hope? Although the threat of violent crime hovers most heavily over inner cities, it respects no boundaries, and in a recent CDF Newsweek poll, violence was the top concern of parents and children in all races and income groups. Between 50 and 60% of the teens in this poll said they knew someone who was beaten up and threatened with a knife or a gun. More than 1 in 10, and this was a rather heavily suburban sample, of the children reported being personally victimized by violent crime. While I have been talking about children being killed, it is sad that the crisis of children having children has now given way to the greater crisis of children killing children. While arrests for murder and non-negligent manslaughter for individuals 18 and over grew 10.5% between 1982 and 1991, juvenile arrests for these offenses rose almost 93%, and more than 80% of these juvenile murders involved firearms. I think that we have seen or are witnessing a total breakdown of American values, common sense, and parental and community responsibility to protect and nurture children. Never before has our country seen or permitted the epidemic of gun death and violence that is turning our communities and many of our schools into fearful armed camps. Never have we seen such irresponsible marketing of guns to private citizens under the false guise of safety, or as the solution to legitimate fear of street crime. Guns, we've got to make clear, do not increase our own or our family's safety. They endanger it. A New England Journal of Medicine study found that a gun in the home is 43 times more likely to be used to kill a family member or friend, to commit suicide, or to cause an accidental death than for justifiable homicide. A lot of the suicides, again, a disproportionate number of them are guns, and one wonders how many young people would be alive today if there were not this easily available lethal weapon at hand. And I would hope that whether we're talking to hunters or NRA members or gun owners or not, that we can begin to reach some consensus or agreement that child gun deaths must stop and that young children should not have guns, and that we can come together in a broad-based coalition and join in calling for a ceasefire and for responsible firearms and ammunition control. But crucial gun control is not alone enough to prevent violence and reestablish peace and mutual respect in our homes, neighborhoods, and society. We must also address the breakdown of spiritual, family, and community norms and just opportunity in America. Whether the focus is on random shootings or the drug epidemic or too early or out of wedlock childbearing, we are drawn back to the limited opportunities that lead too many children and adolescents to conclude that they have nothing to gain and little to lose. When our young lack a stake in our dominant values and norms, both we and they face a perilous road ahead, though some might well argue that a lot of the problems is our young, particularly on the inner cities, thanks to television, have bought into our dominant values and norms. And that is the problem, is they see guns as power, and they see things as things that justify killing other people for. But never have we witnessed or permitted children to rely on guns and gangs rather than parents and neighbors for protection or love, push so many of them onto the tumultuous sea of life without the life vest of nurturing families and challenged minds and job prospects and hope. Never have we exposed children so early and relentlessly to cultural messages glamorizing violence, sex, possessions, alcohol, and tobacco, with so few mediating influences from responsible adults. Never have we experienced such a numbing and reckless reliance on violence to resolve problems, feel powerful, or be entertained. A single trip to the movies often results in the witnessing of multiple deaths on a scale that makes them seem irrelevant. New York Times movie critic Vincent Canby counted 74 dead in Total Recall, 81 in RoboCop 2, 106 in Rambo 3, and 264 in Die Hard 2. While I am sick of record companies profiting from the violent rap they find a ready market for among white suburban and inner-city youths alike, I'm also just as sick of Rambos and Terminators and video games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap that portray decapitation, murder, and other violence as fun and entertainment. In 1990, and nobody more than Peggy Sharon, who's in the audience, and we need to get you out of whatever you're doing to start all over again, Peggy. But in 1990, the average American 2 to 5-year-old watched more than 27 hours of television a week. And again, for many inner-city children, the figure's higher. This adds up to over 8.5 months of television watched by preschoolers who are likely to witness thousands of television murders. The lines between make-believe and real life blur. In rudderless child lives, unpeopled by enough caring adults transmitting positive values or helping them interpret what is seen. Is it any wonder that a teenage boy in Boston responded to the murder of an MIT student with, "What's the big deal? People die every day." What do? We have to do something. When Thurgood Marshall died, an old man was paying his last respects to him and stood in line on a cold, chilly day. And when he was asked why he was there, he responded that he didn't just witness change, he caused it. You and I must cause change in this post-Cold War era of unbearable dissonance between promise and performance, between politics and policy, between creed and deed, our capacity to prevent and alleviate deprivation and disease and suffering and violence, and our reality in a world where 1 in 5 people lives on less than $1 a day and 1 in 5 children lives in poverty in the richest nation on earth. First thing I think we must do is to recognize that change is essential and to join and determine that we're going to each be a spark in a movement to leave no child behind, and to see that every child in this country gets a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, and a safe start, and can grow up with nurturing, caring adults in nurturing, caring communities. We've got to recognize that there is no easy, single, or quick solution to the gun violence and family disintegration, poverty, and racism we have permitted to accumulate, escalate, and permeate our culture and national life over many years. But there are achievable solutions that will require simultaneous and sustained personal, collective, and private and public sector leadership. I think we're fighting a potentially fatal sickness whose cure requires intensive care of every American, from the president down, and from every parent, youth, professional, and citizen up. We must begin to say enough. I wonder what has happened to us when we can let a murder of a child every 2 hours go by and not get morally outraged. I never thought I'd see the moral threshold in this country drop so low. Or to hear when I say 800,000 Americans died from gunfire in the last 25 years, people sort of say, oh. Second thing we've got to do, in addition to mobilizing ourselves, is to do whatever is necessary to achieve a ceasefire and to, in the gun deaths against children, and to really work vigorously to build a kind of massive movement to stop the proliferation of non-sporting firearms and ammunition in private hands, and encourage all of our governments at all levels to take the necessary steps to regulate the manufacture, marketing, and possession of guns and ammunition as dangerous products. They are. We've all got to inform ourselves about the myths that many of the gun trafficking has wrapped itself in. We should all understand and read the Second Amendment and understand it's got nothing to do with private ownership. It's got to do with the militia, and the NRA has taken what they have lost in the courts. Every court that has adjudicated the Second Amendment has found that it has nothing to do with private ownership, and they made a political myth out of it. And we've got to begin to educate ourselves and to answer back and to let people know that guns endanger rather than protect. And we must tell parents who are out of the best means of they know how, who are trying to protect their families and to do the right thing, that this in fact may well be having the opposite effect. And we must all make pariahs of those who seek to arm children and people who kill children. And we should tell our cultural leaders that they can figure out how to write more creatively without having to entertain by use of excessive violence. The second thing we've got to all do is provide positive alternatives to the streets for children and implement a range of community measures to keep children safe. Safe corridors, safe houses, peace zones must be established to protect children to and from schools, and we must have neighborhood and citizen and parent vigils and watches and effective law enforcement strategies. And when we ask young people and parents what the number one thing they need, it is after school, weekend, and summer programs. Kids don't have anything to do. And we're having a huge debate in Washington with this new $22 billion crime bill. We said didn't have any money. You've never seen $20 billion materialize quicker than when it came to building new prisons. We are struggling to get $900 million included in any final bill, which is called the Ouncer Prevention Council, which has money in there to help communities provide summer and after-school programs and weekend programs. And if you had one thing you could do to help us this evening is to let your Congress people know and let the President know that we want at least 1 ounce of prevention for every 10 pounds of cure in that crime bill, because we've got to give kids something to do. And we also got to get jobs back on the agenda. We cannot stem violence without talking about jobs. Neither can we have decent welfare reform without jobs. And so we've got to get jobs. Ironically, there's this wisdom in Washington that to talk seriously about jobs, that's not realistic, it's too expensive. And we need to say flatly that jobs are a heck of a lot cheaper than these prison cells that they have found the money to build. And we must begin to change the terms of the debate. Fourth, I hope we can get the religious community to begin to sort of rekindle our spirit. In October, for the third year, October 14th to 16th, we're going to be sponsoring again Children's Sabbath, where we do religious action kits for congregations of all faiths. We want to use this year's Children's Sabbath as a teach-in and pray-in and study-in and teach-in on violence and violence in our homes and in our communities and in our culture, and what we can begin to do to provide solutions to that. And I would hope that all religious congregations of all faiths will lift up the needs. We're also trying to really begin to find ways of making people feel the violence and feel the horror of our children's lives. And we have been using a program called Child Watch Visitations in other areas to make people kind of see kids. The statistics are one thing, but until you go into the neonatal intensive care nursery and see that 1.5-pound baby and hear the doctors tell you what it costs to try to keep those little teeny things alive, and how much that might have been avoided had they had adequate prenatal care, and let them see the possibilities of what's going to happen to that kid in terms of school readiness or long-term problems that might have been prevented. But we also take them to good hospitals, like in Washington, the Southeast Community Hospital, where they do good outreach, and parents from the same neighborhoods that we have shown them in D.C. General who didn't get prenatal care do get it, because somebody went to knock on doors and to really make an effort to get those mothers in and to see healthy babies born with these poor mothers. We take them to homeless shelters, and we take them to good transitional housing. We take them to a bad school, and we take them to a good school, so that they can see the problem firsthand, personalize the suffering, tie the child to a policy choice, the absence of prenatal care, the absence of health insurance. And you can see the light bulbs go off. We have just field tested this past week a Child Watch module on violence, where we take them into a neighborhood and let them walk down these neighborhoods or go into these housing projects where these kids live every day amid drug dealers and hear the gunshots. We take them and talk to parents who've lost children. We take them to a school that is like a prison, and we take them to another school where children are learning and feel safe and have a different environment. We take them to a juvenile court and let them sort of see what goes on there. We take them to a morgue. But we want them to see what is going on in the war that we have let our children have to deal with day in and day out without adult protection. I hope we can do one of those in Boston for many of you. And we'll be talking to many of your leaders. And we take them to a rehabilitation center where they can see the child victims of injuries who are sitting there maimed for life, so that we can begin to feel directly the war in the way in which television makes us feel it when it happens in Sarajevo. But we have got to begin to understand and to rise up and to do something. The fifth step is for adults, once we understand what is happening, is to break our code of silence about the breakdown of moral and family values and parental responsibility for children. I applaud Jesse Jackson calling on black youth to break the code of silence and to really try to speak up about violence and drugs and guns in their schools. And while I share his belief that young people of all colors need to be empowered and respected by and involved with adults in reclaiming their lives, schools, and communities, I believe even more strongly that we adults should not ask children to assume responsibilities for problems that we have created. It is adults who have engaged in epidemic abuse of children in our homes. It is adults who have taught children to kill and disrespect human life. It is adults who manufacture, market, and profit from the guns that have turned many of our neighborhoods and schools into war zones. It is adults who have preached moral values we have not practiced. It is adults who have financed, produced, directed, and performed in the movies, television shows, and music that have made graphic violence ubiquitous in our culture. It is adults who have taught our children that hate, intolerance, violence, and selfishness are family values. It is adults who have born children and then left them to raise themselves, and it is adults who have left millions of our children behind without basic health care, child care, education, or moral guidance. And it is adults who have taught our children to look for meaning outside rather than inside themselves, teaching them, in Dr. King's words, to judge success by the index of our salaries or the size of our automobiles rather than by the quality of our service and relationship to humanity. And it is adults who have to stand up and be adults and accept our responsibility to parent and to protect the young, both in our homes and in our society. We must struggle to value our children enough to discipline them, to spend time with them, to be decent role models for them, to fight for what they need from our community and nation. And we've got to learn not to keep guns under our bed, in the closet, in the truck, or in the car because they are dangerous to our children. Finally, I hope that we can, as adults, recommit ourselves to redefining a sense of what is important among our national investment priorities. We're going to have to reauthorize Head Start this year, and we're having a big struggle. The president sort of committed himself to full funding for Head Start, for which I'm grateful, but boy, getting it out of the Congress in this atmosphere is going to be like pulling, every kind of teeth. We are facing, as you heard, an enormous struggle on welfare reform, but the parameters of the budget game are such that they're talking about which poor people's programs you're going to cut to sort of talk about reforming welfare, and nobody's talking about jobs, and you cannot end welfare as we know it, which we all favor, without talking about jobs and moving people to self-sufficiency. How are we going to pay for things? We're in the middle of balanced budget mania, which looks like it just may pass unless you make yourselves heard, but which would build in all the inequalities between the military and domestic needs, between the rich and the poor, by all these people who voted for the deficit they're now trying to hide behind the Constitution to solve so that they won't have to make the hard decisions we send them to Washington to make. And so we're going to have an enormous struggle again if our children are going to be protected, if we're going to be able to get the basic investments, the jobs, the sense of hope that is going to be crucial, and to give them an alternative sense of the future. We're all going to have to be spokespeople for a changed set of national investment priorities. We cannot continue to hold the defense budget still sacrosanct. We need to ask very hard questions about whether we really do need that Seawolf submarine. And that $5 billion that's going to be there next year, more than we need after-school programs, whether we really need that F-22 fighter jet set that's going to cost us up to $25 billion, more than we need to invest, again, in youth jobs and in improved early childhood investments. But we've got to engage in that debate, or we're not going to be able to get a hold of these problems. And we've got to give young families a basis for forming and being able to be stable and to form healthy families and support their kids and get wages and jobs back in the debate. And we can't do that unless we build that movement I talked about. But we also must be clear that we can change things. And I want to just end with a story which is about a teacher that I read in a book called When There's No Place Like Home, where my friend Tony Campolo talked about a school teacher, Jean Thompson, who told her students on the first day of school, boys and girls, I love you all the same. Teachers lie. Little Teddy Stollard was a boy Gene Thompson didn't like. Slouched in his chair, didn't pay attention, his mouth hung open in a stupor. His eyes were always unfocused, his clothes were dirty, and he smelled. He was an unattractive boy, and Gene Thompson didn't like him. When she spoke to him, he answered very rudely, usually yeah, no. She got a perverse delight out of putting X's next to the wrong answers when she marked his papers, and when she gave him an F, she always did it with a flair. Teachers have records, and she had Teddy's. In first grade, his record said, Teddy's a good boy, he shows promise in his work and attitude, has a poor home situation. Second grade said, Teddy's a good boy, he does what he's told, but he's too serious, his mother is terminally ill. Third grade, the record said, Teddy is falling behind in his work, he needs help, his mother died this year, his father shows no interest. Fourth grade, Teddy's in deep waters, he's in need of psychiatric help, he's totally withdrawn. Christmas came, and the boys and girls brought their presents, piled them on her desk. Most were beautifully wrapped, all except Teddy's. His were in brown paper and held together with Scotch tape. And on it, scribbled in crayon, were the words from Miss Thompson from Teddy. She tore open the brown paper. Out fell a rhinestone bracelet with some of the stones missing and a bottle of cheap perfume that was almost empty. The other boys and girls began to giggle when they saw it, but she had the good sense to hold up the bracelet and say, isn't it pretty? And to say put a little perfume on and say, doesn't it smell lovely? At the end of the day, when all the children had left, Teddy lingered behind and came over to her desk and said, Miss Thompson, all day long you smell just like my mother. And her bracelet, that's her bracelet, it looks real nice on you too. I'm glad you liked my presents. And when he left, she got down on her knees and she begged God to forgive her. The next day, when the children came, she was a different teacher. She was a teacher with a heart, and she cared for all the children, but especially those who needed help, and especially Teddy. She tutored him and put herself out for him. By the end of that year, Teddy had caught up with a lot of kids and was even ahead of them, and several years later, Gene Thompson got a note that said, Dear Miss Thompson, I'm graduating from high school. I wanted you to be the first to know. Love, Teddy. 4 years later, she got another note saying, Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. The university has not been easy, but I liked it. Love, Teddy Stollard. And 4 years later, she got still another note saying, as of today, I am Theodore J. Stollard, MD. How about that? I'm going to be married in July. I want you to come and sit where my mother would have sat because you're the only family I have. There are millions of Teddy Stollards all over Boston, Massachusetts, and our nation, children we've forgotten, given up on, left behind. And while it's often hard to relate to the millions and to the big, big problems, I think we can begin by just relating to the individual children we see in our lives every day, to take that extra time to make a difference. How many Teddys will never become doctors, lawyers, teachers, police officers, or engineers because there was no Gene Thompson, no you? How many children will never learn enough now to earn a living later because you and I did not reach out to them, speak up for them, vote, lobby, and struggle for them? Each one of us can become a Gene Thompson, and every one of us must if we are to feel and heal our children's pain. It takes just one person to change one child's life and to ensure that people like Teddy are not left behind, have a safe haven from the street, a voice at the end of a phone, time with an attentive big sister, brother, or mentor. The most important step each of us can take to end the violence that is tearing our country apart is to change ourselves, to change our own hearts, our personal priorities, our neglect of any of our children, and add our voices to others in a new movement that is bigger than our individual efforts, to put the social and economic underpinnings into every one of our American children and to begin to relate to each other on a basis of mutual respect and caring and make the American dream real for every child. And when they feel that respect and that attention and that caring, then they will not need violence as a way of making themselves heard. I went over my time and I forgive you, but thank you for letting me come.
Mrs. Edelman has agreed to take some questions from the floor. We'll spend some time. There are 4 microphones in the room, one here, one up there, and one there. So if you'd please go to the microphones to ask your question. I'd ask you to identify yourself and try and pose your question briefly if you can. Sorry.
My name is John Werner, and I'm a middle school teacher. My students know you well. I have a Children's Defense Fund poster right at the front. They see your supportive face every morning. The tragedies you spoke of describe my students, and I wanted to know how do you see
school? Where's your school?
It's a Boston public school. I teach special ed students. How do you see schools as preventing, alleviating, serving as providing an alternative for these tragedies? Specifically, how can schools be better community builders? Your program is outside the school. I'd like to know what schools can do.
Oh, I think that, community building's got to be within school and without. The most important thing schools can do, one, is to have high expectations for all children and teach them well. Because good basic skills level and a sense of competency is really the most important thing. And I just want to say to you how pleased I am that you are a teacher. My oldest boy has now become a teacher. I think he's going to stay with it, but who is in his 3rd year of teaching. But I just think that that is so important. After parenting, I think that teaching, and everybody can be a teacher in whatever role you're playing, is terribly important. Secondly, I really do think that schools have got to work out and work in partnership with parents and with other community institutions, because again, kids don't come in pieces. I mean, after kind of making sure that you are fighting to provide the quality of education for all kids and believe that all kids can learn. I mean, give them that extra attention. We tend to give those children who need the most attention the least. Those children who need the most resources, the best laboratories, the best books, we give them the least. And so we've got to deal with the inequality of resources once we have those expectations. I believe very strongly in the importance of making sure that leadership in schools is pro-child and pro-family and pro-community, and that principals are probably the most important way in which we can begin to intervene to create the new kind of atmosphere that make parents and kids feel welcome in a learning atmosphere. I think that schools should become community institutions. The after-school programs should be in every school, that weekend programs and that summer programs should be in schools. One of the things that we're doing now through our Black Unity Crusade for Children is working in large part through schools, through the summer with summer food nutrition programs. There is this program on the books, summer nutrition program, says all the kids who are eligible for school and lunches and breakfast during the school year are also eligible for food in the summer. Yet only 1.8, we're doing a press conference in the morning at 9 o'clock, in fact. Only 2 million of the 13 million eligible children get it. We have been running programs in some rural counties where we are keeping these programs open, but then building in black college students and other college students to provide academic and cultural enrichment and mentoring and tutoring, and using young people from the neighborhood so that young people can see a sense of what they can become. And we've been doing intensive leadership training. We trained 200 young black college students last year. We'll do another 200 this year who ran Freedom Schools in 17 sites. And Boston is one of those places. We'd like to consider this, but schools should be keeping themselves open so that they're alternatives to the street. Whenever you ask young people why they did something, they always, the most common answer you get, didn't have nothing better to do. So we've got a chance here to give kids 2 meals and snack, to sort of pair them up, and I've talked to Eli Siegel about how we can use some of the National Service young people and put them into these schools in the summer. It's the best violence prevention program. It gives cafeteria workers jobs. When we reauthorize the bill this year, I hope we can do something about transportation from rural areas, but schools must become true community institutions and really build ways of keeping themselves open for kids. Finally, there are wonderful models in New York City, the Beacon schools, where they are now taking schools that are staying open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, but where they are true places where parents come for their GED and for respite and for cultural activities, where kids come, and they are beginning to reclaim their neighborhoods through the use of schools and building them in as community institutions. And so I hope that you will try to encourage, and we will be working with school superintendents and with principals to see how we can make them truly a part of the community and a real extension and supplement to what young people get at home.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, well, we'll take this one, then we'll move to this.
I'm sorry. I'm not being very clear here.
Okay. But my name is Patrick Myers, and I'm at the Harvard School of Public Health. you alluded to product liability for manufacturers of firearms. As you know, the Washington, D.C. initiative has met with substantial resistance in Congress. Are you aware of other jurisdictions with promising approaches, and how important do you think increasing liability for manufacturers is as a strategy for reducing violence?
Well, I think that is, I think it's a very difficult area. I think a lot of people are at least exploring that, and I think we need to explore a whole lot of things. I do sense that the grounds are shifting, and the whole gun control era. I think that there's a lot of ripeness that does not belie how hard it's going to be. But I think that the whole product liability area is one that needs to be explored. It's very difficult. What I'm talking about is the regulation of guns as dangerous products. And there is now, in this week, Rolling Stone published an excerpt in Rolling Stone, but in a new book called Ceasefire, by two young people, Kristen Rand and Josh Sugarman, where they have, in a sense, made the case for why guns should be dealt with and regulated as a dangerous product, with their cost-benefit analysis is the same as what we do for toasters and blankets and other kind of things. When lawn darts killed 3 people, they pulled them off the market. And they have drafted a model bit of legislation that people are now testing in focus groups. And we will begin to use this new law, or model law that one would like to try to see introduced, as a way of trying to get a debate going. I mean, obviously Sarah Brady and others, Congressman Schumer is going to be introducing new comprehensive gun control legislation, and as you may know, there's a great deal of tension between those who would control guns and those who would ban guns. I'm a very new student of all this, and I'm just learning the politics. But at any rate, we're going to have a continuum of things around which to debate. And I hope that we can translate these debates into something that's significant and keep product liability, or one more way of trying to talk about making people responsible for the consequences of what they're acting, and making it hard, or making people have to think twice before they throw out these dangerous products. I think all of this will be helpful, but none of it's going to be easy. I mean, we have very, very powerful interests, but we have to have an equally powerful counter voice. But I think we keep trying, we keep pushing, and one of the things that I think was good about the Brady bill is at least it broke through the notion that nothing could be done, and so was New Jersey. In fact, I heard a pollster the other night say to me that gun control almost saved Jim Florio, and that guns may well be, or gun control may well be, a viable issue around which candidates can run if enough of us, and particularly women, begin to really mobilize and say enough. So don't give up on it. It will be very hard. Yes?
Hi, my name's Keith Hennessy. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. I'd like to ask you about your strategy. And you were talking about cost-benefit analysis, and it seems to me that your strategy is to try and educate people about the benefits of solving these problems that you describe. It seems that now you have the friendliest administration to your goals that you've had in a long time, and that most members of Congress would agree with the benefits of your goals, but that they're having problems with the cost. They're having problems going after the farm subsidies or the grazing subsidies or the Medicare or the Social Security that they have to go after, or raising taxes or whatever you would like, to try and pay for the things that you'd like to do. Why have you chosen to focus your efforts on teaching people about the benefits of solving this problem, which I think most people would agree that we should solve all of these problems, but that they instead, I claim, they don't realize what they actually have to give up to do it? And why have you not chosen to point out the ridiculousness of the need for another Seawolf submarine, or we pay to Social Security benefits? But
We do.
okay, it seems from
We
what I've
argue
heard-
all 50 alternatives.
Okay.
No, you heard one side of me tonight on this particular issue, but we argue all the time about, the need for sacrifice and struggle and fairness, and really looking at competing national needs and whatever. We argue that the cost of not doing something and not investing is greatly outweighed by, the neglect. And in fact, we have a study underway that Bob Solow is chairing at MIT to see if we can't change the terms of the debate from how is it that we can afford to end child poverty to the fact that we can't afford not to end child poverty. We're trying to sort of make the economic case. But we argue very strongly, even though nobody wants to hear us, about the Seawolf submarine and every other weapon systems, and try to talk about holding the same holding the Defense Department to the same levels of inefficiency, to the same standards of accountability and efficiency as we do domestic programs. We try to argue that, you know, while we cut the poor, we should also cut the middle class and the rich, and that there should be equal sacrifice from the elderly. We tell that to the elderly, that we love them, but we think that their grandchildren are just as important as they are, and they should be speaking out for kids. And so we try to argue in all these ways, and we do it in the forum that makes where we think we're going to be most effective, and you know, and gradually you get heard. But again, it's hard unless lots of people begin again to raise their voice and to answer back when they say we cannot afford jobs, or we cannot afford to find the money to finance Head Start or early childhood education of high quality of kids. They've got to answer, and because politicians are sheep. They respond to whom they hear from, even the best ones. They want to stay elected, and so that the key, again, there are going to be no favors. There are no friends in politics in many ways. You've got to make your voices heard, and the only way we're going to break through and shift the paradigm and get our kids' needs taken care of is not only because they are scared to death of not doing something, or they are understanding that they're now at risk or their kids are at risk, but that we make the case, and we make the case in thousands of calls and thousands of other things, and they think they're going to get unelected or get bad publicity if they don't do what we want them to do. So our job is to create that constituency and that movement. But it's hard, as many people here can tell you.
Was there questions there?
Okay. Hi.
Hi, my name is Song Yun. I'm a first-year Master's in Public Policy student, and my question is this. How do you make being a teacher or being a principal or being a community activist or, you know, a social worker, a caseworker who deals with children and families, the kind of frontline people on the war against violence on children, how do you make those kind of jobs just as high prestige, high status as jobs such as being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an administrator or a politician? And do you think that's an achievable goal? And if so, do you think it's an important goal?
I think it's an important goal.
So such that we don't feel, people like us don't feel like we have to make some huge noble sacrifice if we decide to graduate from a school like this and decide to become a teacher or a principal. Kind of be on the front lines where we're
I can't
not.
think of anything duller than working on somebody's corporate contract to give somebody an extra. I can't, I mean, you know, I have not, you know, I clearly believe in an ethic of service, and I think that this country has got to move toward an ethic of service, that's what's been wrong with us. I go out of my way, and since I'm a law graduate, to tell everybody, for God's sakes, we don't need any more lawyers in this country. We really go teach. And that the point is you can choose any profession, but you do it out of wanting to serve. And I think that it is important to start with parents in the home so that children don't feel the pressure and think that they're not doing what is expected of them, or they don't. I mean, I've had young people come and knock on my door at night to say, I really want to be an early childhood teacher, but my mother thinks that that's the worst thing in the world. And so, you know, I think we have to begin to try to say to parents, let's get out of the status thing and give our children permission. And be proud of them when they choose to serve. And one senses, I mean, the hunger, I love the range of applications that are coming, and I love the fact that so many young people are going out in communities. I love the number of young people who are trying to sort of find opportunities to make a difference. And I hope that we can, in everything we do, encourage that, both in our homes and in our congregations. And I do sense that there is a new mood that's out there. I mean, there's the Rush Limbaugh mood, but there's also another mood of people out there really trying to do good, and we just need to be brought together in a galvanized force. The president's focus on national service, I think, is a good step forward. You hear more and more school systems and local people talking about service, and so I just hope that this crisis of breakdown of community can bring us to our senses, and that more people will find ways of saying, how can I respond? And, you know, if you decide to be a doctor, whatever, then, you know, the point is there are areas in this city that need doctors desperately. And I hope that everyone will kind of think about teaching, and that whatever you do, that you might consider stints of government service without having a careerist notion, but where you're going in to learn and to see how you can be more effective. But I hope we will all try to ask different questions and value the helping professions and value service. And so it's going to be a real tug for, again, the conscience of the nation. But I know we're going to win in the 90s. And I just hope that you will feel that affirmation and be encouraged to choose make different kind of choices. The only time I've ever gotten in trouble in my life is when I started thinking about what I wanted. And all I can say is that it's been great fun. I get my jollies out of building paths where nothing exists. And there's just a concept of enough. I mean, how many cars do you need to get there? I mean, you know, my little Honda gets me there just as well as a BMW. And, you know, there's nothing that we've ever lacked for. And so, again, I just think that we need to have a sense of balance and a sense of wholeness and a sense of relating to what this country says it's about. So I hope you go be a teacher.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Deetra Edwards. I'm a youth worker in Boston. And a lot of the things that you talked about as far as what's happening with young people, and then also talking about where the adults are and where they need to be. One of my big concerns is how do we, those of us who are on the front line, gain the support that we need in order to continue to do the work that we do. I wonder, in this type of environment at Harvard, I know someone who goes here, so knew you were here, to be able to come and hear you speak. But how do you allow those types of things to happen for other youth workers who day in and day out are on the streets with young people? What are the opportunities for them to be able to gain support from the Harvards and other places? And how do we start that conversation in the process? Because you're sitting here talking about these things, but a lot of my friends are out in the streets right now doing the work that needs to be done. And how do we start the dialogue between this group and that group to create some of that process? Because we're working at different ends.
Well, more people, whoever like your friends, have got to tell more people like you when there are forums like this. Secondly, I hope that there may be ways of people from Harvard reaching out and doing visitation programs and child watch programs. I do that for my staff. I mean, because you get so boxed into yourself in Washington and in the Beltway if you don't make people get out. And so I hope that one builds in reality testing as a part of what you're learning here, because Boston should be a laboratory. And so I hope that, you know, people will spend time out there in the inner cities and in communities. Thirdly, I am really absolutely obsessed with how we kind of create a critical mass or a new climate, and how we reach back and train new generations of leaders and strengthen and nourish and nurture those leaders out there who are struggling but without kind of main ways of support. And we do this in lots of ways. We do it through conferences. We're doing it through increasing networking. And in the black community, where CDF is there for all children, but we're making a special targeted effort right now to see if we cannot create a new leadership capacity in the black community. I was raised to be a leader. I mean, I was raised by adults in my homes who taught us service by how they lived their lives. That was affirmed when I went off to college with Dr. King and Dr. Benjamin Mays and Whitney Young and Carl Holman, and adults were always there interacting and training children and young people and telling them that you were getting educated in order to serve. So we never had a chance not to try to be useful. I mean, we never had any mistake about what we thought life was about, because adults taught that, and that was reinforced in Mississippi. And, you know, we were mentored and trained, and so one of the things that I think has happened in the last years is we did not reach back and train the generations behind us and share with them the kind of struggles and the sense of history and the sense of empowerment that we were given. And so we're stopping, and that's why we've started something called the Black Community Crusade for Children. We have decided we will train at least 1,000 new young leaders under 30. We've made a good start. We've just bought Alex Haley's 127-acre farm as a way to bring people together, to rebuild the sense of leadership and family, to bring networks together. And it's been wonderful to have meetings where we have 6 generations, where Dorothy Height and John Hope Franklin, with Leon Higginbotham, with my generation and Bill Gray's generation, and then, you know, the next generation, but where for the first time we are reaching out to empower young people as we were empowered. But we're also trying to do that across disciplines and across race. And so trying to find forums and really network and bring people together to talk about how we deal with shifting the paradigm and gain nourishment from each other is an important thing, and we're going to be spending probably more time on that than almost anything other than national policy over the next years, because there are very few places where people can go to create a new kind of service ethic about how you do relate to children and families in a community setting. And so, we're struggling with a kind of a new kind of leadership school where people can come together and model the kind of community that we seek to build in the outside world. So call us out.
All right, well, I put this challenge to people in this room is I belong to a network of youth workers in Boston that meet the second Thursday of every single month at Appalachian Mountain Club, and it's called Youth Workers Alliance.
Great.
And we're youth workers who are out there doing the work and is working with young people every day. And to invite you all to come to that meeting, and it meets from 10 to 12, second Thursday of every single month, because I want to be able to see opportunity for the things that we're able to give to you and the things you're able to give to us, because if we don't do that, we're not doing our young people any good at all.
Hi, my name's Jason Snipes. I'm a PhD student here at the Kennedy School. My question, I guess, is a bit of a how. You were talking about reducing or doing something about urban violence. In particular, there seems to be a problem with the way young black men learn how to get respect and learn how to handle emotions and really how they develop. And a big part of the problem, at least, is that we don't have older, not only positive role models, but positive black males who are engaged with their children in order to sort of teach them and not just sort of provide them a model, but really help them develop. And you actually can see sort of a disconnect. And to the extent that it's cyclical, that there aren't really people that we can sort of stick in there now and say, okay, raise these children. There's a bit of a question as to how. It seems like a huge challenge, and I was wondering if you had what directions you're sort of going to really sort of deal with this really big piece of the violence problem.
Well, it is a very big piece. We have been working with, Dr. Edmund Gordon has been chairing a seminar for the last 2 years with a group of academics to look at all the outstanding research on black males and what has happened, and whether we can come up with ways to intervene that would be effective, and hopefully that will be reported on in June, and it will be a report, and we will do a series of follow-up action meetings. But secondly, in the meanwhile, the question is how do you make up for substitutes where the fathers are not there, and we have been encouraging, as are many people, mentoring programs and Big Brother programs and rites of passages programs, and have been making very targeted efforts in a lot of our community-based programs to make sure that we're getting a hold of as many young black boys, and that is one of our big things with black churches, is to make sure that black churches really do provide that kind of extended parenting that they used to provide, and until we can begin to stabilize families and find ways at a critical mass level of intervening in this cycle, where you try to salvage as many as possible. Thirdly, I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do with our Black College Student Network, and we've been making, again, a special effort to recruit young black college men so that they will be there as role models and give young people an alternative sense of possibility. Finally, we spend a lot of time really trying to tackle the whole issue of teenage pregnancy and parenting responsibility. We talk to boys and girls about the importance of parenting, about not wanting to be the kind of parent that you may often sort of worry that you don't have, the absentee father. Really trying to tell young people not to have kids until they're physically and emotionally and economically ready to take care of them. But ultimately, the answer is trying to make sure that you are fighting with them to provide them the kind of education and the kind of concrete sense that there is hope and a future and some alternative out there, and involving them with us in trying to do that struggle. And I have been very pleased with how much intergenerational mentoring, the mentoring efforts that are now beginning to happen between college black men and high school students, and in turn with elementary students. In my home county, where I grew up, and there were high expectations in the black community for all of our kids, almost 40% of the young black boys are labeled not ready for first grade. And so we have been making a special, targeted, intensive effort to work with parents and to train master teachers and with them to use high school students to begin to see if we can break that cycle right then. And we're in our third year of intensive effort. I'll tell you, we have 100% parent participation. Parents don't often have a sense of what can be. They don't know what a good education can be. They have not felt welcomed in libraries or in public schools. And so it's been something to watch the light begin to come on in their eyes and to sort of see the kind of relationships that can be built. The churches are now beginning to stay open in the afternoon in my rural county and to sort of reinforce the parental ethic of learning. We've opened up a bookstore, which we didn't have in our county, that's run by young black boys because we had no books and they didn't have books that showed black kids or Indian kids. And so one thing has led to another, but where there's a new kind of ethic of hope there that's beginning to evolve. The second piece was trying to intervene after the preschool level, and we're following these kids up, and we'll try to follow them through until they get through high school, is the middle school level. And there was not an 8th grade black teacher in my county that could teach algebra. And so we have begun a middle school project, but at the same time, again, training teachers. And again, they're amazed at how kids, if you have high expectations, will rise to those expectations. We're using this laboratory in this 30,000 county that's half black and half white, very poor. The biggest new industry in town is the prison. It looks like a community college. There are more things to do inside the prison than outside. And so we're trying to compete with that and to see if we can't, in one 30,000 rural county, change the sense of possibility, get a whole community around its children, because if we can't change one county with 30,000 people, we can't change the nation. And since we have to change the nation, we want to try to see if we can start right there. And so I think it's going to take a long time, but I think there are enough people, the Alpha Phi Alphas, the Coalition of 100 Black Men, are running mentoring programs and academic enrichment programs with scholarships behind it that are reaching hundreds now rather than tens and 50s, and some of them are reaching thousands. And so what I see is a network of growing concern and support on the part of a number of black male networks. And if we can reinforce that through churches and through other institutions, perhaps we can begin for a number of young people to begin to break that cycle. But my instinct always is to start early. And if we can try to get more models that can deal with whole places, whole towns, whole counties, then maybe we'll begin to see a difference. But it's a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year effort. Thank you.
We're running out of time. Let me do this. We won't be able to get to everybody. Let's take one more from each, maybe one from each microphone
And I'll try to be shorter.
here, and the question's brief. If we can.
Me.
Go ahead.
I'm Bonnie Zay. I'm a student here. I volunteered at the Connecticut Junior Republic. That's a facility for adjudicated juveniles. We had a very successful, we actually have a very successful program over there. It's been running for about 25 years, and our recidivism rate is about between 5 and 7%. A lot of the methodologies that we came up there, a lot of our experience-based programs certainly could be applied to, or would be helped with the knowledge that we had, certainly would be useful for people who were running after-school programs, boys' clubs and girls' clubs, because as an organization, we pulled members of the community in who had knowledge to lead workshops and to lead adventure programs along with the staff for our students. One of the question I have for you is, how do we go about getting this information out there? The knowledge of our organization and what we did really was limited to the community involved in working with juveniles. But what we had certainly has applications otherwise.
Thank you.
Well, I would hope that you would send information to the Children's Defense Fund, but I also would hope you would send it to groups that are in these localities, and we are trying to provide some kind of a clearinghouse function, and through our monthly newsletter and through quarterly best practices newsletters now, trying to get out there examples of what people are doing, because I think there is a lot out there that's working. People don't know about it, don't know how to connect with it, don't know how to use it. And so I would encourage that you share it with us, and I would assume there must be forums here at the school through whom you can share it. And there certainly are local advocate groups like Mass Advocacy here in Boston that I'm sure would be delighted to learn about it and to get more of that information out. So I'd love to know about it.
Hello.
School exchange.
My name is Tony Solardi, and I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all the students for coming here to speak to us. And even more so, I'd like to thank you for dedicating your life to the service of others.
Thank you. It's easy.
I believe that the suburbanization that preceded the growth of the interstate highways earlier in this century sort of reduced a sense of community in this country. And I also think that the advent of the information superhighway that's coming up is going to further exacerbate that sense of community in this country. What do you think, or which direction do you think that the nonprofit and public sector should move in order to reinvigorate a sense of community in this country, and hopefully, following that, reduce crime and violence?
Well, I think that, I think we should all find a way to serve. I mean, I think we'd have to do it in little and manageable ways. I mean, you've heard someone talk about the need to kind of have somebody connect here in Boston around their youth services programs. There are many, many programs in the Boston area who desperately just need tutors and mentors. My son is looking for people to help him out on Saturday night out at his Milton program for his inner city kids. I mean, there are many opportunities to serve, and I hope that people would just begin to make a habit of service, to be a big brother or a big sister. And I've always found that one thing leads to another, that you put yourself in a situation where you're dealing with people and get into a network of people who serve, and you will find that there are just enormous numbers of opportunities. And secondly, I think it's really about commitment, that whatever you choose to do, that you say, I'm going to do that in a way that's going to make a difference for those who have the most need. And you will find, I think, that that is ultimately very satisfactory. It is not a sacrifice to do what I do. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of reward on that, but I think that if you simply open your eyes and ears and say, what can I do here to respond to a need, an answer is always there. And I think that, we often try to look for great big things and big ways to make a difference, but the key is kind of starting small and trying to relate on a day-to-day basis and try not to bite off more than you can chew. One of the things that we've been talking about in terms of some communities in violence, Jeff Canada, who runs a very gifted leader in Harlem, is trying to think about how he can get the community in his Harlem neighborhood to say on one night a month, we're going to keep children safe. We're going to figure out how we can provide all these activities one night a month, because you said if you tried to do it every night of the week, that people would collapse and find that impossible, but they can sort of achieve some success one night a week and think about the things that one night a month and think about the things that might make a difference. Then maybe they will begin to think about how they can proliferate that. But a lot of it is just about connection and caring adults. Kids just need attention. And they just need somebody who's there and who's going to care about them and who's going to spend some time with them. And I guess I would say start off by mentoring and tutoring.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, as someone who was a juvenile delinquent and a pregnant and parenting teen who found you a tremendous, motivating mentor and are very much a large part of how I recently finally got through law school. So I really want to personally thank you for all the work that you have done. It's really huge. So I spent 19 years as a parent, 8 years as a foster parent, and 17 years working in the courts with battered women and abused children. And I'm hoping that at some point we bring to this conversation the need to protect mothers because they are held responsible by our society for the safety of our children. And if we do not eradicate family violence, it is the root cause of virtually every major problem we are facing as a nation today. This is where our children are learning to be violent. And if we don't talk about better protecting mothers, we are not going to ever protect our children. And I'm wondering how, or if you are willing to weave into the work of the Children's Defense Fund, talk about family violence and the need for communities and the courts and all of us to work better. I'm also a formerly battered woman, and it's a lot of how I came to this work. But just watching the response of my family and my community and endlessly looking for excuses and why not to protect me or not to protect my children. And it's my hope that the literature, the posters, the conversation will focus on the family and on family safety. But I also hope that you will expand the notion of making safety plans to including not only economic empowerment of mothers, but safety plans for them as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These two people have been very patient, so
Yes,
why don't
thank
we
you.
do these two and then we'll finish off.
Hi, I'm Eileen Jones, and like you, I am a graduate of Spelman
Yay.
College. And certainly on behalf of the Spelman women in this room, it is a joy to see you and to hear you, and we welcome you.
Thank you.
I am currently student teaching in, quote, urban school at Boston English High School here, and my concern is often we tend to blame teachers, and we say that teachers are burnt out, and my assessment is often that is true. And in the school I work in, I would say that teachers are cremated. They're to the point that they are absolutely drained. But if you were to go there, and if you were to see you too, like I am now, would be burnt out at the end of their rope. It is such a large responsibility to work with students. We have already lost 2 students this year to violence, to guns. You don't have to live in Dorchester or in Roxbury to hear the reports of children, 15 and 16, gunned down at T stations and so forth and so on. And these kids are gunned down in front of other kids, and they come to school. And they come into my classroom, and I'm supposed to teach English. Okay. So my question is how do you see the Children's Defense Fund working with teachers to help them provide that type of environment? It's very difficult. It's a difficult environment to create, and I believe that particularly urban teachers need skills in order to create that that safe container for those kids when they come in from the T stations and they've seen their friend gunned down in front of them. And you're supposed to teach 10th grade English. There needs to be a training there. The needs are there, and I was just wondering, how do you see the Children's Defense Fund possibly working with urban school
Well, we
teachers?
have been trying to at least raise our voice that there is this enormous need. I mean, we have been having this extraordinary problem going on, and again, nobody has been planning or sort of designing adequate responses. Mental health services and counseling is almost non-existent in many schools. The need for support for kids as parents and as teachers is crucial, and so, you know, trying to begin to raise the voice for the need for schools to kind of begin to deal with the whole range of things of this kind, to help both teachers help children and to help teachers help themselves, is a very big concern. Willie Brown did an education summit in California this week around schools and violence and the kind of supports kids need, and I just think that we just have to keep raising our voice, trying to encourage schools to form relationship with mental health agencies and other community agencies and try to begin to use this as a resource not only for its kids but for its teachers is again another option. But I think that we've got to get a community dialogue going. And that's one of the points about why we're trying to get these children's Sabbaths going and why we need to start talking aloud about violence and for us to consciously plan a way of responding to what is a public health epidemic and a public health emergency. And yet we are sort of, you know, coming around reactively and are dealing with it with only kind of, you know, ways of checking guns and with more security things. And so I just think that we have to try to do more of a dialogue in this way. Lastly, through the Black Community Crusade for Children, and Bob Peterkin is a member of the Education Committee and Jim Comer's on the Education Committee. We're trying to begin to kind of talk and get a dialogue going, and we have a network of educators with whom we are beginning to work and to see if we can't begin to raise a voice in the policy arena, and are trying to do this in the kinds of services we're trying to foster, both in the legislative process and for the first time, one of the good things I would simply say in Washington is we now have serious attempts at interagency cooperation where you've got a Secretary of Education who's wonderful, Dick Riley, Secretary of HUD, a Secretary of Labor, a Secretary of HHS, and an Attorney General who really do want to work together and figure out how they can put together a comprehensive, sensitive effort to stop violence, to deal with drugs, to look at the whole family, and who are looking, therefore, in a holistic way at these issues. So I'm hoping that you will see new sets of policies and new directions and new tones coming down because you do have this kind of attempt to deal with the whole family in the context of community and with the needs of teachers in a broad range of places. So I hope that you will begin to try to get a different tone. But the community itself has got to get a conversation going, and teachers through their unions are going to have to speak up. And educators are going to have to demand more supports as well as for themselves as well as for kids. Last one?
Great. First, I want to just thank you for the Ella Baker Institute work and BSLN, because I think it's been a major contribution to student community action around the country. But my name is Maura Wolf. I'm the executive director of a program called Teens as Community Resources in Boston. And one of the things the teens we've been working with are real concerned about is just the fact that this summer is going to be a very scary one here. And we've begun talking about summer jobs and trying to say, can we try to do this not the week before school gets out this year? We've got all this money going into communities. The week before folks get out of school, we start trying to figure out where these folks go without training and support. They told me at the mayor's office, you got to talk to the state. State says, talk to the feds. How do you think we can begin a dialogue now to put some pressure federally at the state level and the city so that we can make this summer a safer one in terms of young people having jobs?
You just have to get, it's such a frustrating and hard issue. And all I can say is you just have to be a pest and get as many people as you know to be a pest. And we really need to force, our federal agencies to pay attention to the need to invest in more summer jobs. And I can't encourage phone trees too strongly. And that's the message that we need to be putting into the White House. We need to be putting it into Congress with key people, because we've got to get jobs on the agenda. But secondly, we need to, it's so impossible to plan. It really is impossible to plan. And you've got mayors here who know about the frustration, not knowing what's coming down. And for 2 years, we have told everybody to keep their Head Start centers open because we're going to have summer Head Start money, only to see that we don't have any summer Head Start money. But it's very hard. But at least there is an awareness of this issue. I am told that the National Service money at least will be available by April 15th this year rather than closer to June. But all I can say is you have to yell, and we are yelling. But lots of people have to yell louder and very persistently. But I will again take your message back, but keep burning up the wire with the mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.